Hey all, Scott here from Art of the Genre, and today we're going to take a little bit of a divergence. We're going to take a look at a classic, I guess classic, AD&D adventure, but it is not something that was produced by TSR. Today we're going to take a look at CAS1. This is Cairn of the Skeleton King. It was produced by Rob Kuntz in 2006. It's a really neat kind of take on the very early days of the OSR and the Renaissance and the grognards and all the things that were happening in the early 2000s when you were really kind of sitting on probably the first 5 or so years of D&D 3.0 and the kind of resurgence into getting back into AD&D gaming. So this was produced by Rob Kuntz and his company Pied Piper Press, and it was only in existence from 2006 when this module actually came out to 2010 when he shut it down. And they had a couple of a run of, I'm going to say half a dozen products, let's say. 3 of them I don't really know, but 3 of them I know pretty well because they were something that were taken into effect in, I guess, what you would consider the precursor to Kickstarter and crowdfunding campaigns. That would be the 2 modules in the CAS series. That would be the Cairn of the Skeleton King and the Tower of Blood, and then also the module that doesn't necessarily go along with it, which is the original Bottle City. All 3 were produced by Pied Piper. I believe all 3 of them were kind of I guess crowdfunded because they're all listed in the interior with a series of sponsors and levels, and I think no more than 500 were produced. This one that I've got is number 384, I think, in that series of production line, and then the Tower of Blood that I have has a more comprehensive signed and numbered page, and it is out of 500. So I assume this is probably out of 500 as well. I think Bottle City is probably the same too. Anyway, I'll grab my notes on it and we'll kind of go through this adventure because it's really kind of a neat one if you can ever find a way to get your hands on one, or if they're available out there. I've never looked them up to see what the price point is, but my old DM, Mark Tim, I give a shout out to him because I wouldn't have these without him. His brother is older than he and I, and he was kind of in that initial 1970s genesis of D&D, so he would travel to Lake Geneva, Wisconsin from northern Indiana, where we're from, and he had relationships with a lot of these people, Gary and Rob and other people in the industry that they role played with. So I think that's how my DM Mark was able to kind of get in on this and get copies of these, and then he ended up giving them to me in the mid 2000s when they came out. And I'm really, really happy that he did because they're great additions to anybody who has an AD&D classic adventure set. If you're trying to be a completist, I would put these 3 modules in there because they mirror everything that was done, I think, in those early modules from the 70s and 80s. And as you can see, take a look at the cover image. That is a cover by Jim Holloway. Now, Jim had not done an AD&D cover since probably around 83 when he was doing the I series. That would be the Desert of Desolation. He did those with some of his later ones, and then Dungeon Land I think he did as well, and then he was kind of out after that. So it's nice to see Jim back in doing this. He did the interior artworks on this one. The cover says Artist Jim Holloway Special PPP Premier Edition, and he did do both the cover and all the interior artwork. And it's great. It's very classic Jim, and I'll show you a couple of the pieces right here. It's funny, I know a lot of people have commented on my videos and said I wish we could see more of the artwork or longer of the artwork. The problem with that is I am a horrible person when it comes to editing stuff, so I can't put my talking underneath the artwork, or I'd probably just sit around and blather about the artwork if I could, if I just had an audio track, but I don't. So I'm trying not to take too much of the video to do it. But anyway, Jim's work is great. It's very classic Holloway, very classic 1980s Holloway as well. And I give him a great shout out for working on these pieces and kind of bringing that 1980s feel into the 2000s, because again, this is 2006. So that is really the part of the artwork. I will show you as well. This is a removable cover. This is classic. You've got another great piece on the back by Jim. I don't think I've got a shot of this, so I'll just put it up here. And then the interiors as well. But I'm going to show you the removable cover does have the blue interior dungeons. This is the Cairn of the Skeleton King, if you're speaking, I guess, Irish, is what we're going with there. And then it has a secondary dungeon, which is the classic cave dungeons as well. So they did everything they needed to do to make this a classic adventure, which is what I try to do in my folios as well. I just don't use the classic framing. I kind of try to make it a dragon magazine just to give more artwork on the front. Nevertheless, let's go into this. I think I've got most of the the preface here on it, but I'll just get into the adventures. One of the things that Rob says in the beginning, he kind of gives you an introduction. He talks a little bit about dedicating it to Gary, who I went in and researched it, and he actually lived on the same street as Gary, obviously younger. I think he was 16 or 17 years old when he started to play the very first Genesis of Dungeons and Dragons, and then he gamed with them for many years and came in and out of the company. And obviously there's all kinds of dynamics there that I don't really understand or really want to get into, but nevertheless he dedicates this to Gary and gaming at the table with him when he was very young. And that said, he also talks about something about bygone eras, where he wants to make this about the bygone eras, and he's against over storytelling. So over storytelling is something that we get into a lot when we're talking about the OSR, and that's putting in a skeletal adventure that has roots of things for the DM to use, but doesn't get overly invested in storytelling or making putting in people on a train and running them through it and making them go through certain details. So Rob, when he designed this adventure, obviously is looking to make a skeletal dungeon and fill it in with various encounters and traps and so forth, which he does a great job of. I think it has that feel that you're looking for if you're looking for a classic AD&D adventure, because of the way that he's put it together. There's nothing in here that is going to make a DM go crazy and trying to remember great details. The story is very basic. It comes in with something called the Skeletal King. The Skeletal King is an undead creature created by a necromancer, and the necromancer has since gone against his god, which I think is Orcris in this one, and has been put into a slumber. And because he's been put into a slumber, the Skeletal King remembers some of the aspects of his life before he became undead, and wants to do service to his kingdom and get himself killed. And so he sends agents out to talk to the people outside his that were still alive in his kingdom and say, please send adventurers to come down and kill me. That's an interesting take. And so it gives you a little play-by-play with the Skeletal King and what he wants. Again, not too crazy of a story. It doesn't take much more than that. The characters just know then they're going in to kill a Skeletal King who wants to die. He can't really go against the power of the necromancer, kill himself, or not try to kill the characters, but he does want them to finish him off. It is his hope. It's a neat take. It's a fairly basic, I think it's a 24 room encounter. They're large dungeon rooms, not any little cell crawls. They have, so like I said, some cool traps. He puts in some absolutely fantastic magic items in it. There are a couple of them. There's the Sword of Hades, which is awesome. Just awesome. When you're talking about, a +2, +3 item that he's just put in a lot of really cool wrinkles with. And then he's also got something called the Cloak of the Dagger. Awesome little magic item. And I think that's one of the onuses when you look at great DMs, and something that I try to do in the folio as well, is that you make stuff that gives a wrinkle. It gives something else that's not found in the DM's guide. And you can take just a very basic item and just give it a couple cool little wrinkle abilities that you don't see all the time. And all of a sudden you've got a classic, item that people will never get rid of. Because one of the things that I've seen and I've talked about, I think, in my writing, is that a lot of times characters will be like, +1 sword, awesome, got it, throw away their old sword. And then it's like +2 sword, got it, throw away my +1, get my +2, +3, it's all in upgrading. And one of the things that I look at as a collector or somebody who has nostalgia for things, it would be like, let's say getting a dog and then getting a better dog and just throwing your dog out. You got to understand that, in my sense, when you're talking about players, if you give them the onus to love their items or be really attached to those items, especially things that have killed a troll or saved them or bailed them out with a nat 20 when they really needed that nat 20, and you think that blade is the one that got me through that battle, then it's very unrealistic to go, oh, +2, I'm getting rid of my +1, which served me from level 1 to 4. I mean, those are prime levels that somebody's not going to want to get rid of that item. That's what I've talked a lot about upgrading weapons, but nevertheless, if you give items that do have powers or extra little wrinkles, it makes it harder for those players to get rid of those items, so they might continue to keep using them even though they desperately need that extra plus for whatever reason. So keep that in mind, because I think the stuff that he's done in here are great options for DMs. Again, this is a very straightforward adventure, 24 rooms. You're going to go through it. He's going to got some great traps. You're going to take on a lot of different skeletons, from base skeletons to skeletons that have gems in their head that are much more powerful, that details in the back, to monster skeletons, giant skeletons, all kinds of weird skeletons in here. He does a lot of statues, and then he's got, I think, some specters and barrow wraiths. So you're talking about undead. Anything that can't be critical, basically, is going to be in this module. Then you will make it through, and you can get to the section where you will talk to the Skeletal King. He'll tell you about the Necromancer. You'll go find the Necromancer, fight a couple other things. And then when you actually get to the Necromancer, he's asleep, so he's just coup de grace. It's kind of a neat end way to it. And then after you kill him, you get to go back to the Skeletal King and fight him. And he will fight you one-on-one or a group on him. And it's kind of a fun battle because you know he wants to lose, but he's not just going to give it up. He's going to die with honor in combat with the players. So that's great. It's a classic little run. And then at the end of it, when you can go to the second part, which kind of bleeds you down, it's something called the Warren of the Ghouls. It's Ghools. Ghouls. And he denotes this as there's a difference between a standard ghoul and these ghouls. They're different undead creatures, and they definitely are. He details them in great detail in the back in the appendix. And you'll have the ability to go against them. It's just the secondary adventure is very basic. It's just running through a bunch of caves, fighting the ghouls, fighting some goblins, a couple other undead in there, and collecting some treasure before you then can have an escape tunnel that will take you either out or to the Tower of Blood adventure, which is your next one. So it's great. These just go one, next. I think he had a great idea when he was going through it, so they work very well together. Again, the levels are 4 to 7, which are the prime adventuring levels. I absolutely love those levels. I think most people would agree they do too. And whatever the case, it's a great run. There's not too much to it. You're not going to have to sit around for 3 days making notes on what you're going to do in this. I think on my read through, it took me maybe 20 minutes to get a really good feel of what's going on, taking a look at the traps, taking a look at a couple details. You're good to go. And that's what I think Rob was really trying to do when he created this adventure. It's one of the things that I find you can do very well with a lot of the early TSR adventures. So again, this is non-TSR. It's Pied Piper, which is gone. Unfortunately, it went out in 2010, just before, 2 years before the advent of Kickstarter, which I think they could have done incredibly well on, especially in those early days. I mean, you could throw up a picture and get $10,000 in that time. So anyway, I think they would have done well, but they, for whatever reason, they didn't go that route. And this company, it no longer exists. But they did produce what I consider 3 classic products. I will go over the other products because I have them in my collection. Thank you, Mark. Over the next couple of weeks during this coronavirus shutdown, because right now it is Corona shelter in place here in California. And for posterity's sake, if you come back and watch this 6 years later, coronavirus, you can remember it. So anyway, I hope you enjoyed this. Again, please subscribe if you can. And also take a look at our products on Art of the Genre. We've got a lot of, obviously, physical products that I can ship out to you, or digital products you can get immediately if you are also sheltering in place. So keep that in mind. And otherwise, thank you for taking a look at Cairn of the Skeleton King today on Art of the Genre. And as always, great gaming.